a mic? Hello, hello, hello. Great. Hi, I'm Debbie Zimmerman. I'm the executive director of Women Make Movies, a nonprofit organization based in New York that works with women filmmakers. We distribute films that are by and about women, and we assist women producers and directors in helping them to find financing for their films in the United States. I'm really thrilled to be here. I think this is the third panel I've done at Sheffield on producing. And I just want to start with a little story, just a teeny tiny story, which is that quite a number of years ago, more than 10 years ago, I was at IDFA, and we had, I'm sure you all know IDFA in Amsterdam, and we had quite a few films in competition that year, so I decided to host a dinner for our filmmakers. And I invited all of the directors. And I got a really big talking to from one of the producers who said to me, "Why was I not invited to the dinner?" And I said, "Well, you're not the director." And she said, "But I'm the producer." And I said, "What? Sorry, we just really think about directors as filmmakers." And I have to say that I'm totally and completely embarrassed by that story. And I tell you that because I've learned over the years that producers, and I didn't read the description of this panel, but are really the unsung heroes of this industry. And a good producer, in my mind, can absolutely make or break a film. I deeply believe that for women filmmakers, women directors, we need more producers. We need more women producing for women, and we need more men. Thank you, Mark. Producing for women directors as well. So I'm really thrilled to be here with a panel of very accomplished and fantastic producers that are going to really help us to learn more about what producing is all about. And we want this to be a really interactive session. So we're going to ask you all to Twitter, if you Twitter, with the hashtag 8-letter word, 8 with the number 8, I think it's up there, telling us what you think a producer does. And we're going to kind of feed that back to you in the remarks from the panelists, or maybe I'll just throw things out as we go along. Again, we want it to be interactive, so ask lots of questions. We'll start off with some introductions and some brief comments, but then please ask questions, and we want this to be a dialogue. There are mics, I think 2 roving mics around the audience, and we do ask you to use the mics because it's a big room and it kind of echoes, as well as the fact that it's being taped. So, without any further ado, allow me to introduce the panel. To my far left is Kat Cooper, who is currently co-producing a feature film, The Homing, written by Jeffrey Kane of Constant Gardener. She also, her latest film, which I actually met, I guess, the directors of the film. I was on a panel with them in Hot Docs. I moderated a panel in Hot Docs, a feature documentary called Alfred and Jacobine, which had its premiere at Hot Docs. She's actually an alumni of the NFTS's Entrepreneurial Producing for the Creative Industries. She's a graduate of the Rotterdam Producers Lab and BFI's Guiding Light, so she really has tremendous experience that she can bring to us about being trained as a producer and working as a producer. She also is really happy for it to be known that she once worked as a Christmas elf, which I really appreciate that she put that in her bio. To my close left is Ingrid Kopp. This is a really international panel. We have Canada, Australia, South Africa, now living in New York, and UK. Yeah, so there we go. And I, of course, am American. Ingrid Kopp, who I've gotten to know wonderfully because she lives in my hometown of New York now, her title is the Director of Digital Initiatives at the Tribeca Film Institute. Before that, Ingrid was actually, there was something wonderful in your bio about that. She was the U.S. producer of Shooting People in the U.S., and she was responsible for its editorial awesomeness. I take that from LinkedIn. She right now is overseeing the TFI New Media Fund, which is really one of the very few funds out there that funds digital initiatives. And she's going to bring that experience to the table of what does it mean to produce for digital projects. Oh, I guess you see it up there as well. So, nope. Nobody tweeted yet about what a producer does. To my far, far right is Mark Johnston. Mark has a 3-page long bio, which I couldn't possibly condense in like more than a half hour, or less than a half hour. But he's worked as a producer or director on over 60 films, including the BBC, PBS Millennium, Tribal Wisdom, and The Modern World. Oh, so many BBC series, I can't even begin to to describe them all, but he is an extraordinarily experienced producer that's bringing that experience to us. And to my near right, from Down Under, is Jennifer Cummings. She's the principal of the Sydney-based Heiress Films. I like that title. A factual. It is ironic. She's not an heiress. No. But it's a documentary company specializing in personal stories on a large scale. She recently produced Making Couples Happy, the follow-up series to Making Australia Happy. And the 3-series website garnered over 1 million page views in the month following the broadcast. She also is formerly the head of factual development for ABC Television and had a brief stint as head of arts there. So thank you all for being here. And I want to start by just asking you, what was your road to becoming a producer? And actually, I think, Kat, I'll start with you, since we know a little bit about your road, but how did you make that decision? And were you a director first and became a producer, or did you start off saying that you wanted to be a producer?
So I started off working in production.
Maybe a little closer to the mic.
Sorry. Yeah, so I started off working in production, and they were big studio features, and when I first started, I thought what I need is to find a department. So after one Harry Potter film, I moved over to casting, thinking this is what I want, but actually I missed production. Went back, didn't think about producing. Still wasn't thinking about producing until about 3 or 4 years in, and I was selected as a writer for a training scheme, which was called Think, Shoot, Distribute, that the BFI does. Really good training scheme. And over 5 days, they gave a full overview of film, who does what, at what stages. And somewhere in that week, I realized I wasn't a very good writer, but producing looked like something that I could do. And that's when I really started doing my homework on the courses and the training that was available, hooked up with Skillset over here, my regional agency in Wales. And that was how I started. So it was a bit of an accident.
And just as an American, what is Skillset?
So Skillset is a training organisation for the UK. So if there's a course that you want to go on and you're a freelancer, it will be heavily subsidised by Skillset, up to 80% of your costs. They arrange events frequently. They support courses run by other organisations. Festival attendance they can help with as well. Anything that will further your training. And for productions in the UK, or coming to shoot in the UK, they're asked to pay a levy to Skillset. So a certain portion of your budget should go to Skillset, and that is then to train the next generation of filmmakers. Great. So if you want training, that's your first port of call.
Fantastic. I'm going to go to the other end of the spectrum and ask Mark.
Let's see. Well, I always thought I wanted to be a foreign correspondent, and I got a job at a program called The National, which on CBC in Canada is the national nightly news, and I just hated working in news. It took about a year, and I just couldn't stand it anymore. And so it was in the days when they could make a call to another program, and they moved me as a producer onto a documentary program called The Nature of Things with David Suzuki. And I spent a year there, and then I got a job as the head researcher on this BBC series, which was Canadian and British co-production about the smallest small-scale tribal cultures left in the world. And I was the head researcher there, and almost immediately upon getting the job, the executive producer, whose name was Adrian Malone, and he created Cosmos with Carl Sagan and The Ascent of Man with Bronowski. I was lucky enough to spend 3 years as a series associate producer under Malone, and it was the classic associate producer title in which you are the left hand, that you're the hand of the senior producer, and you basically do everything that they can't do. I can't make this trip here and have this meeting. You're going to do it. Can you arrange to? And so you just, I got to follow Adrian around for 3 years and figure out how to make series documentary television. So it just happened that way. And then I eventually started my own company. I spent almost 7 years here working with the BBC and Channel 4 and learning about business how to run a business. I'd left the business for 4 years, and I was a chief of staff to Anita Roddick at the Body Shop.
Oh.
And that's how I learned about how to be an entrepreneur and how to run a company. And when I moved back to Canada, I started my company, and that was 18 years ago. Wow. So, you know, it just came out of necessity on that production that they needed a junior producer on Millennium, and of course I just said, yes, I'll take that job. So that's the journey, really.
Great. I'll go to the other side of the world, to Australia.
I did when I left school, I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to have fun, and I thought the media seemed sort of interesting. So I did an arts media degree, which at that time meant nothing, but I didn't know that at the time. So I got out and I sent probably 100 letters to production companies, or what I thought were production companies. God knows what they were. They were probably facilities places or something. I had no idea. And the only person that got back to me was someone from deep down the cavern of the Human Resources Department of the ABC. Bless her. Carmen was her name. And so she said, look, there's a production secretary's job going. And I thought, I can't type, but anyway, I'll go in. And so she gave me a typing test, and she said, do you want the good news or the bad news? And I said, oh, give me the good news. She said, well, you typed 40 words a minute. We are going back a bit, okay? And I thought, oh, that's pretty good, because I had typed all my essays at uni. And she said, the bad news is that you had 0% accuracy. Anyway, we got on rather well, and the next day I got a call from her, and she said, there is a production secretary's job, and do you want it? And I thought, are you mad? She said, probably. But anyway, so that was my into the ABC. So that's probably one skill that I would say is necessary as a producer, and that is to talk your way into all sorts of places. So anyway, I worked at the ABC as a producer. After I did the secretarial job probably for a year. I learned a lot during that. Then I became a researcher. There was no really official training programs then at the ABC. They were just sort of waning. And then I directed a lot of programs, and we were called producers then, but you directed. Yeah. And then I left. I freelanced for a while. I came back as head of development, factual development at the ABC, and I did the stint as head of arts. And then I set up my company. And I think the reason that I set up my company was because I was sick of giving money to other people to make programs by the end of my time in factual development, and I thought I really want to get back out and make programs. So I don't direct. I made the decision. I think it's really, really hard, long hours, you have to be incredibly focused on one particular thing as a director. And I think I love the idea of creating teams and a whole range of things happening at once. I like being across that. I don't feel competitive with directors. I think, I want to work with the best directors, as I do want to work with the best of all sorts of people. And I feel great ownership of those. I mean, most of the ideas, to be honest, that come under my company are mine initially, but I'm open to other ideas too. But anyway, that's me.
Oh, that's so much food for thought. And I want to come back to you. Ingrid, you're not a producer, actually, but you work with producers. And I'd love to hear what is the difference between producing for new media and producing for traditional film.
Right. Yeah, I'm a bit of a black sheep on this panel, but I am, because I work as a funder of interactive documentary work. Increasingly, I am working with producers who are moving from creating linear pieces to interactive, and I've been very, very involved in that space. And like you, I really have always enjoyed working across a slate of projects. I used to work at Channel 4 in the documentaries department there. I have actually produced, briefly. I know I said I wasn't going to talk about it. I had a stint producing reality television, which I did not enjoy and was not very good at. But I learned a lot about producing on a very quick turnaround. And it was actually, I'm really glad I did it in retrospect. At the time, it was a bit hard. But I did also realize that what I really like is this idea of how you facilitate for things to happen. And I think a lot about, how we create an infrastructure so that producers can work within that, finding the funding, getting the resources that they need. And I think that's how I've always sort of thought about my career, is really how do I facilitate for producers and directors and everyone else to make the work. And increasingly what that means is how do you you know, how do you bring funding, but also, I guess, thinking to the space of how interactive works, and whether it's an interactive piece that lives alongside a television broadcast or a theatrical premiere, or even an interactive piece that lives on its own on the web or as an app or as a game or whatever it may be, and what that kind of producing looks like, you know, what budgets look like for interactive, how the interactive team works with the film team. So it's really kind of trying to work those things out, because some of it is very, very different, but many of the lessons can be carried over.
You know, a lot of people think that a producer is the person who gets the money for the film. They're dollar signs or pound signs. What do you think are the most important skills that producers need to have?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would say that I would qualify the person who gets the money as the executive producer. And sometimes those people will play the same roles, and I would be an executive producer on a film, and I may be the producer, but as the producer, you know, I'm working on a day-to-day basis to help it happen, drawing contracts, making sure that staff are hired, going through the financing plan, arranging interim finance. So, you know, often being in charge of lodging the rights to the project within a production. It may be a single-purpose company set up just for the occasion of that film. So you're doing all of that as the producer. I think I have a list somewhere, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Of duties, yeah, because I've got into discussions with filmmakers who say, well, what are you actually doing on this film? And I'll say, I'll send you the email. And
maybe you can send us all that.
Yeah.
Ammunition.
But
actually, sometimes I think it could be, what don't you do?
Yeah. Yes, I think so. So, you know, to me, the producer is the person who is the glue, you know, holding a production together, whether it's holding the team together and making sure that they're prepared or taken care of and they have everything they need in terms of production and that things are in place, as well as financing, as well as making sure every contract is signed with every financier, that you've considered the right situation. So I think it's not a very well understood area, but I'm happy to share that list. I have a partner in Toronto, and she always sends that list out to directors that we might work with, really, just to say, just so you know, this is what we're going to be doing.
Really interesting. Like a shortcut. I think one of the key skills for a good producer is talent spotting, because you are bringing teams together. And in fact, I was only saying to someone the other day, I spend so much, my company's very small, but I spend an inordinate amount of my time meeting with potential people, either for ideas or to crew up, because it's a freelance world that we work in, and they're always moving around, and you want to make sure you're getting the best people. And so I get excited by that. I have endless coffees. I am caffeinated to my eyeballs. I'm endlessly having them. And it is, and sometimes they come to fruition, you know, and often it's just a little bit of mentoring for someone who wants to know something about the industry, but sometimes it comes to something and it means it. And then I think the other thing is, if you treat your people well, you will get the loyalty returned. And for me, that's really critical. So even in that freelance world, which is really highly competitive in Australia and I'm sure everywhere else, I have a decent track record of people coming back to work with the company again. And that's good. And it's also good when you're going in to pitch to the broadcaster and you can say, oh, you know, that director's back on, the editor who you loved his work, he's coming back on, you know. So and also it means you don't have to, you know, reignite a new relationship every single time. So, yeah, I think they're key.
Note to self, make sure you drink a lot of coffee.
I think, you know, I think another thing that I've really noticed a lot, and I'm sure this is particular to the interactive space in some ways, but I do think that producers are having to think about audience a lot more than they used to, because obviously, you know, with many of the films and obviously with the interactive projects, the audience isn't a given in the way that it would be, you know, it goes out at 9 p.m. on Channel 4 on a Tuesday. It's much harder making those connections between the project and the audience now, and I think, you know, it can be very difficult for the director to be thinking about that while also trying to get a project off the ground. And I think sometimes that there can be a real tension there. So some of the best creative producers that we've worked with have been really doing that dance between setting up the project and bringing the talent to the table so that the project is as good as it can be, but all the while also constantly thinking about the distribution and the marketing and the audience and the connections on the back end, because otherwise those projects don't go anywhere. And you can end up with this beautiful project that no one sees. And so I think more and more the producers are really having to do that work around audience engagement as well.
Kat?
I think as well as the logistics and physically bringing things together, for me, nurturing. Producers have to nurture, so we're nurturing the talent, and it's very much mothering to me.
And when you say talent, are you talking about the director, or are you talking about
They
the
need
people in the
mothering
film?
too. Yeah, no, I think everybody does. I think everybody wants to feel safe. Like, it is like building a home and building a family. So there's the human element to me is so important.
Yeah, can I just add?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah, I just think that, you know, we have, for experienced producers, I think it's important for us to help emerging filmmakers and broadcasters or distributors and financiers who are very much involved in a film. You know, I've worked with several young filmmakers where, you know, it's a first film, and you have to play this role in the room with those financiers and say, look, together, this is going to be a terrific film. You know, I've worked with you 15 times, and you know, I promise as producer that we will build a family or a team around this young talent, and we will deliver the film. So, you know, I do more and more of that. I think there are almost a dozen projects I'm attached as an executive producer where I'm really only showing up some of the time just for those high-level meetings to say, look, we're building a good team, and you know that we will deliver a good film. And so emerging filmmakers need that kind of support, and they need for us to believe in them. And I think we're obligated to give back, because people, you know, Adrienne Malone did that for me, and so I think it's imperative that we do that for emerging filmmakers. That's the value of a good producer or executive producer. They guarantee that they will help that filmmaker make that film work. So,
I want to ask you about the relationship with the director, but before I do that, I've heard a couple of you talk about creative producing, and I want to ask you about that. Do you see yourselves as creative producers? What is a creative producer?
Well, I'm a director as well, so I've directed a couple dozen films. So, you know, I think that as a creative producer, you have to be trusted by the director to be able to help them shape the film. You have to be their kind of the person who goes into the edit suite with them that they trust, to look at material, to even help them plan what might be next in the gathering of the material for the film. And I think, to me, is building the team around them. You know, they may say, I'm looking for an editor. I mean, and you have people, you have this family of key creatives, I think we call them technically, that you can bring to them. So it's an incredibly important role in the making of a film, that a producer that is trusted by the director to have feedback and, in fact, take a leadership role with them in shaping the film.
Mm-hmm.
Can I be the family breaker-upper just at this point? Because the other experience, which sadly is rather raw and recent for me, is working with a new director who had not seen your 10-point plan, your list.
Yep.
God, I wish he had.
More than 10.
Yeah, 200, however many points I want it, and I need it for the next one. Anyway, I don't even know what the point of telling you this is except that things can be difficult. But I was working with this brand new director who had no understanding of what the role of a producer is. And despite her lack of experience, felt she was completely in control and was the auteur of this project. And it was a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. So maybe the lesson is, from my point of view, that, you know, to try and work with people who at least you think might be open to that collaboration and perhaps understand a little bit more about it. God.
Well, if I can just jump in and give an example of, so here's a creative producer's problem-solving ability. So I worked with two first-time directors on a film about Sudan. It was a feature film. They came out of the news world. It was a terrific story. They had amazing access, and they shot the film, and I helped support them do that over 3 years. It was for Nat Geo International, for CBC, and for Sundance Channel, and it was a feature, and it was a big deal. They cut the film in Paris, and I got the rough cut, and before I could pick up the phone and call Sydney Suisse at Nat Geo International, I got him, and I said, "Sydney," and he went, "Too late."
Oh, no.
He'd watched it. So it was a total disaster. Wow. And I had to get on a call with Sundance and CBC and Sydney all at the same time, and they said they can't cut the film. You have to tell them you have to fire them. They will not lose their credits, right? You're going to quit what you're doing. I'm going to quote Sydney. I love him. You're going to quit what you're doing right now. You're going to hire an editor, and you're going to cut the film and deliver it to me, or you'll never work with us again. And I did it. I quit what I was doing. I pushed off another film, and I did it.
Wow.
And it worked. That is the nuclear meltdown scenario, right? But where there's the creative producer's role, if something goes wrong, you got to fix it. There's nobody behind you that you can blame.
That's true.
It always comes back to you. You're the last person in the line, and you have to take responsibility.
And that's amazing, because somebody just tweeted the fixer and the genie and the lamp of endless wishes. The director, of course, being the person with the endless wishes, and the producer being the fixer. You know, I'd love to actually, you know, before I'm going to ask about horror stories and great successes, but I'm curious about who's in the audience. How many people here consider themselves producers? Okay. How many of you are directors? Okay. How many of you have done both? I'm surprised. I thought that would be more. And yeah, and how many of you want to be producers? And what are the rest of you doing here? No. I'm actually curious. Would somebody just like call out if they don't want to be a producer? Are you looking for producers? That's a good question. How many people are looking for producers? Okay. Yeah. Anybody else want to just like call out why else you came? Oh, come on. It's just like, it's only, what time is it?
No other,
really,
no
like,
other
I mean,
we need more coffee.
Actually, it's too late to still be hungover, and it's too early to, okay, here we go.
Hi, my name is Etta. I will call myself producer because I am producing a film, so I am a producer. I'm also very, Hasadius became a producer because my husband is the director. He has to make this film, and I'm there. I know about production, so now I'm producing first feature film. And my biggest frustration is really that there is no one way to do it. So I will never know if I did the right thing, I guess, until I finished. Is that right?
Wow.
If I could ask that question.
That's a great question. I'm going to actually go down to Kat and ask Kat, as the youngest person, I think, on the panel. What do you think about that?
Do you know what you're doing wrong until you've done it? Yeah.
Or is there a way to do it?
Is there a way? No, you just get through it. You just get through it.
Yeah. You never let the mistake happen again. And we make let's say a single mistake on each film we do, and we learn that we'll never do that again. I think you can't be scared of making a mistake. There's just no way.
No, but I mean, you know, obviously you want to start with good people, a good story, and a supportive broadcaster, ideally. Call me an optimist.
Yeah, that's an optimist.
Well, in fact,
actually, but what's the role of the producer with not just a disaster like that one, but you know, what is the relationship between the producer, the director, the funder? And actually, I'll start with you, Ingrid, as somebody who's a funder. You know, are you dealing with the producer? Are you dealing with the director? What's the relationships?
I think it really depends, and I think that's why, you know, I wonder if things are shifting a little bit in the world that I'm working in more. You know, I used to work very much in the broadcast world, and now I feel like I'm in a bit of a nether region in some ways, in that a lot of our projects are not broadcast. Oh, I guess the web is broadcast in some ways. So I think it's a little bit different, but every project is different. Every single project is different now. And what I'm seeing more and more as well is that the business models are shifting exponentially because of technology. And audiences, you know, I spend as much time thinking about audiences now as I do about creators, and I think I have to. It's not everybody's job to do that, but it's my job to do that, I think, as a funder. Because really, for me, it's so important now with everything shifting and people consuming television in different ways that I think about that, because it's really important for me that these projects get seen. I can't just think about the production. I have to think about how they connect with the audiences once they're done, and what these projects look like, because increasingly these projects live. They live online and they have a life. They're sort of like living projects. They're not done. And so, wait, what was your question? I'm going off on a tangent.
No, about what the relationship between the funder, the producer, and the director.
So it's really different from project to project. And I know a lot of, there are a lot of directors who are kind of producing and directing at the same time. And that can be good. I have seen a lot of them sort of drown in that, and I think it's almost like you kind of get a bit of a split personality sometimes, because there is a huge. I mean, I think a lot of people on this table have used the word nurturing. There's a lot of protecting the director that I think you have to do as a producer, because it is so terrifying sometimes when you're in the middle of a project and you really need someone who's got your back, who can be thinking about some of the details that you cannot be thinking about. As a funder, honestly, it really depends. Sometimes the director is the person who's just constantly wanting to talk to me, and if something goes wrong, it's the director that reaches out to me. Sometimes it's the producer, and I think that comes down to relationships. And I think that's a huge thing. Is it really, you have to kind of get on with people. And sometimes you'll find that, with some projects it's the executive producer, because they have a long-standing relationship with me going, 10, 15 years back. So it really depends. But I have often insisted that, and this is not just emerging talent, by the way, I've insisted sometimes that in order for us to fund a project, that we can help bring in an executive producer or a producer so that we know the project's in safe hands. And we've done that many, many times.
I just wanted to say, I'm just going to put the director's cap on for a minute and say that there's only one producer in the world that I've directed films for, and that's Barbara Bardee. I think, Deborah, you know her.
I know
legendary,
yes, legendary
producer in Canada, and been 35 years as an independent. And I directed 4 films with her, and I just felt, as a director, I felt that she would create the conditions for me to make the film that I wanted to make. And so she helped me choose and build the team around me, would support my creative vision in terms of what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And, her support editorially, she would only show up at rough cut, 20 minutes of notes, and fine cut, and that's how she works. But she had a team and created the circumstances in which I could create the film I wanted to make. And I felt totally confident each one of the 4 times. And, she needed, she'd been a lifetime as an independent producer, and she was wonderful. So, creating the conditions that makes the director feel confident. And I would work with her in a heartbeat again. She came to me, in fact, she did come to me recently about a film and said, would you think about directing it and stepping out of your company? And I've done it 4 times. I said, in a minute, send me the material, I'll think about it. So.
Because it was her producing, as opposed to somebody else.
Yeah, only her, because she creates an environment in which you can make a good film, so.
Maybe, does anybody have any, I'm just gonna open it up and see if there are any questions. I'm gonna give you a little bit of minute to think, because this is a little kind of slow afternoon. Tell us either, you have a choice. You could tell us a horror story of like one of your worst moments. Actually, I'm going to let you choose. Do you want to hear success or horror? Horror. Horror is so much more fun.
Have I already told mine?
Yes, you told your horror story.
I have more, a couple more.
Okay, horror story.
I don't want to say it's a horror story.
Okay.
I'm going to say it was challenging.
Oh, lovely, challenging. Your most challenging moment as a producer.
I was prepping my first documentary film. I didn't come from documentary at the point that I was making this film. And I found a really experienced director. She'd done a lot for the BBC. And it was time sensitive because we had to shoot at Christmas. And 2 weeks before we were due to shoot, she had an injury, which meant she had to pull out. And we couldn't push the shoot back. Either we were going to go ahead and do it, or I was going to have to push it back another year. So I made some calls, I called some directors. Everyone, understandably, because of the no notice, were busy or they didn't feel prepped, and I made a decision to go with a first-time director, which meant that I lost one of my financiers. So I then went into, I mean, when you were talking about, do you know what you're doing in hindsight? All the lessons that I've learned the best have been the most expensive ones. And so I made a call, lost the finance, so I knew that we could cover the shoot and we could go through to rough cut, but it wasn't enough to deliver. I thought, okay, let's go and do it. So we went and shot. The footage was beautiful. Halfway through the shoot, my director, who I'd known a long, long time, and this is what I mean about nurturing and having a relationship, my director came out as transgender, and she is Amy Coop, and she's beautiful, and she's doing beautiful work now, but at the time, in terms of trying to keep a project going, and trying to support somebody through something really, really difficult for her, because she was in her mid-30s. That was my challenge. So it was then getting through the edit and delivering, and we didn't, I mean, the schedule went off. Like, we went over schedule. So that's all the stuff that you can't prep for. They were the best lessons. I learned straight away that, actually, if it's my film, and any financier here can just know it, I will always put a person or a crew before a film. So
okay.
if that had to go on hold, which it did, then that's fine.
It should have gone on hold.
It went on hold.
That's a great lesson. That's really
So
great.
no, it's not a horror, but...
Good. So actually, let's change it around. What's the greatest lesson that you've learned, and maybe the experience that you learned it with? Because that was really beautiful. That's fabulous. Oh, none of them learned anything.
Yes. We know nothing. I was just going to go on to that horror story, which is actually very similar to what Mark said, but no, I can. We
Go
can,
ahead. No,
yeah.
give
Well,
us
that
the
was
horror
it was again. It
They
was.
want the horror story.
Yeah, you want the horror stories. Well, you know, it is a little similar to yours, but yeah. So my Christmas last year was going to finally have 3 weeks off, and this was the point where I had went into with this new director. To see what was meant to be a rough cut for a 60-minute film. She was already 2 weeks over. And I'd been very generous, I thought, with encouragement and whatever. Anyway, I went into the screening, and it seemed to be going on and on and on. And so I sat there, I kept taking all my notes, and at the end of it I said, how long was that? And she said, 80 minutes. And I said, okay, so maybe we should start with where do you think the cuts could be made? Because the broadcaster was coming in about 4 or 5 days later. And she said, well, I think it's just perfect as it is. So that was the beginning of the end. Very, very difficult to sack directors in Australia, just so you know. Very hard work, advised against it by the broadcaster and my lawyer. We hung on to her and we sacked the editor. Sorry about that, someone had to go. She wasn't doing a very good job either. So a week before Christmas, I had to find myself a new brilliant editor. Wow. The material was good, not amazing. 1 week before Christmas, and all the good editors are booked up about a year ahead. So it was unbelievably hellish, and I had to call on all of my contacts everywhere to unearth an editor. And you know the good news? He's brilliant, and I'm now working with him on something else. So that was a good outcome for that. I also, the broadcaster absolutely stood by me on that, and I've, you know, I mean, I worked at the ABC for a long time, and I've got good relationships with them, but you nurture those relationships too. And right up to the head of television, they were extremely supportive. You know, I think they saw it for what it was, and they backed me, and, you know, so the film is now a very nice 1-hour film called Outback Choir, if you ever get to see it. It will be on ABC Primetime later in the year, and we're looking for a distributor, actually.
It's interesting, you know, like hearing all these stories of broadcast and kind of who draws the line, because I think what's interesting, and I think this is maybe how a lot of filmmakers, not just interactive filmmakers, a lot of filmmakers in the States aren't operating in that way. Like they're making films like you know, like starting a business, but there's no broadcast interest. They're raising money from funds. they're kind of out there on their own, and there isn't really anyone drawing the line necessarily, which can actually be a problem. So in some ways, what we're kind of dealing with is different. You know, like there's a tremendous amount of freedom there, but there's also ethically and in terms of boundaries, it can actually be very, very difficult because you feel like a little bit like you're working in a vacuum sometimes, and you don't have that infrastructure support in some ways. And so, you know, it's great, you can do a Kickstarter campaign, you can do this, you can do that, you can partner with an NGO, you can partner with a brand, but it can get quite messy. And I think some of the issues I'm dealing with are actually kind of almost more existential, like, you know, what is a documentary, what is distribution? I mean, it's really kind of getting really, really tricky and messy. And I love that. I mean, I love that. I love being in that space. But it's interesting because those kinds of stories, in some ways, I'm like, God, I wish we had the broadcaster saying, I need to see a cut in 2 weeks, you know, or, you know, fire the editor, because we don't have that. And I think sometimes, sometimes that can lead to problems. It can lead to a tremendous creative work and really interesting business opportunities. But I think there is some really interesting, messy stuff happening right now.
We actually had to fight the broadcaster to sack the editor even.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, they were kind of wanting to support everyone. And in fact, that was one of those times where, as a producer, I had to be tough. I mean, to be honest, I wanted to sack the director. I would have done that too. But anyway, there was lots of good advice, I'm sure, as to not. So anyway, she refused to turn up to that edit with the new editor, and we ended up in a legal dispute. And she ended up with the money, the credit. And no work on the back end, and a film which I think is very good, but she obviously thinks is shocking. But there you go.
Well, you know, I think what Kat's comment about choosing the film over the director, choosing the director over the film, right? Yeah, is a really interesting perspective. All of you've talked about editors, and as producers, you know, again, I'm trying to get at these relationships. You all talked about how this is about facilitating. But maybe you could share how it is that you work with the entire crew, and kind of besides the director, is it the editor who you think is most important, the cinematographer? You know, where do you draw the line between the director's control on a project versus the producer's control? I guess that's really what I'm trying to get at. You know, I would think that the director is the person who's deciding on the editor, but you're saying the producer is deciding on the editor.
I think it just depends on the project, depends on the experience of the director you're working with, because if it's an experienced director, they're bringing their team. I mean, they're bringing their collaborators, they're bringing the DP and the editor, in most cases. And so they're going to provide it. I think it's often with emerging filmmakers, where you can play a critical role in bringing very experienced people to bear. And I just recently helped a filmmaker finish a lovely film that he's 76. He made it for 8 years about the rebuilding of a World War II aircraft. And he had worked in the film business and taken 40 years off to run a family business, and then was about 5 years into this process, but was completely separated from the business itself. And he needed help. I mean, he just didn't know any editors. He didn't know, so I introduced him to what I thought was one of the best editors I worked with, who would be appropriate, and a composer, and every key creative to help him finish the film. And of course he meets with them and finds out whether they're going to get along or not. And it's a lovely, lovely film, and Paul Heaney, you know, who's here today, is distributing it. And so it just depends on the filmmaker. Either they bring their team, or you bring the team to them. And I think that's a beautiful relationship, because you can take an emerging filmmaker and then get very experienced people to come and help them make something really strong and launch a career. I just think that is a special opportunity for us as producers.
Wow. So. Are there other tips that you have? There's a question, but I'm just going to ask one other thing. Well, actually, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just in terms of the director-producer relationship, isn't also money the way that a producer has to manage a director? I mean, obviously that's a tool in the producer's handbag to negotiate with the director who has all these huge ideas but can't fit within the budget. Or do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, there's realities, of course, and you know, you have to be honest with a director about what they know what the budget is. They've seen all the line items. They know how many travel days are built in, and you've negotiated together, right? You've gone through
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's about an available slot too, right? You can't.
Yeah. Your question around the 86 minutes. What is it?
How money plays into.
Yeah, well, I guess for me, I mean, for most producers, I think the money plays into it in terms of the budget you have, and as the producer and the production company, I'm the one that has to deliver that film. I have to deliver what's been asked. And for us, it was a 58-minute film. So, yeah, look, having said that, I must sound like an ogre, but if, in fact, the 80-minute cut was outstanding, I would be at the forefront of fighting for that film. Yep. Absolutely. And move it in for a theatrical first window. I would, I'd take out all stops, absolutely. But it was not an 80-minute film. And that team was not capable of making even a strong 60 was what was clear then. But in the end, I undertake with all of with our contracts with the broadcasters and funders that I will deliver a particular product, and there's an expectation of a standard of that, obviously, and so that's how we do it. But obviously there's freedoms for very experienced directors.
But at the same time, that director has signed a contract with you, and to deliver a certain length film. I mean, it's understood. So, although we can try to be flexible and support. I'm thinking of a film from a couple of years ago in which the filmmakers thought that they had a feature which we had been contracted by the CBC for a 1-hour film, and I said, okay, try to make a 2-hour. Go ahead. So they rough cut it and tried their best, showed it to the CBC, and CBC said, nope. It's not working in the way. It's not enough for us to give you 2 hours of prime time. You're going to have to do the cut. But we said as a team, okay, try. Didn't work. So you can try to make those things happen outside of what you're contracted to deliver. But in the end, you must deliver what you're paid to deliver.
Yeah.
Way in the back there.
Hi, I wanted to ask, in what stage would you encourage emerging filmmakers to get in touch with producers, and how approachable are you?
That's a great question.
Right at the start.
Did everybody hear the question back there? About when is the best time for a director to approach a producer? And Mark is saying right at the start?
Yeah, right at the beginning of an idea. Filmmaking is about collaboration.
Yeah, but let's just say I'm going to play devil's advocate. Okay. Wait a minute. I'm going to play devil's advocate. I'm a young director, and I have a short film in my, in my past, but I have a really fabulous idea for an hour-long film. I haven't shot anything. Are you gonna take that seriously?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes?
I want to
really?
I would want to know what it is. You don't want to miss out on anything.
Okay.
So even if you can't get involved at that stage, you at least want to be mindful of it and let them know to come back. Yeah.
And what's the best way of approaching you?
Walk up here and say hi. Or at the bar.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, you have to drink coffee and drink alcohol.
No, as good producers, I think you're right. You don't want to miss anything.
No.
And you want to help good films get made. So email me, right? Just get a hold of me. Publicly available information. It's easy.
I would also say that, give it some due thought before approaching would be my advice, because, we all have a million shower ideas. I've been so inspired by some of the films and sessions I've seen at Sheffield. I walk across the road, I see something, I'm thinking up something, oh, that's fantastic. But actually, about 10 minutes later, I think, oh no. You do have to filter things. You've got to give them the due process and thought before approaching. But yes, of course, I mean, you know, if you have access to something, you know, that might be all you need for a conversation, access to a particular person, institution, whatever it is. So yeah, I think it's sort of somewhere in between for me.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to throw out something because I've just realized I've spent the last 2 days in meetings, and I would say that quite a number of them are projects that directors were coming to me about, not necessarily producers, and I kind of wish that they had gone to some producers first, tested out the ideas, see if they were going to fly, before they came to me, who's a distributor and somebody that is helping in financing, you know? So, because they hadn't really developed the idea yet, and there wasn't a real plan in place, and that to me is what a producer brings to the table, is that experience of, this is the vision, this is, maybe the director has the vision, the producer has the plan to make that vision happen.
I'm just part of a project now. It's a first-time director. It's a natural history film. It's about giraffes. They came to me. I rewrote all the creative with them to make sure it was presentable. You know, we did an initial budget, and I helped them recut their trailer that they'd shot in Kenya. And it just went to the nature of things at the CBC. And I took it in, because I've made several films there, and we're engaged in discussions now. So you're very much right, is that kind of work with a producer to help shape the materials in a way that will work in terms of getting it financed is important.
But I do think you have to also be thinking, because I think it's quite easy when you're starting out or you've got a project and you're sort of in that slight panic mode, where you sort of forget about what you need and the people that you want to be working with as well. And so, I mean, I totally agree about the meetings, and I would have loved with some of the interactive projects, if they'd had producers on board, I think it would have made the pitches stronger, and it would have made me feel more secure. But I also think, you know, you need to be careful about who you get into bed with as well, and you need to really think about what sort of producer you want and really do your research. And, you know, I think festivals are really good for that, right? Because you're tapping into a community where you get to meet people face to face, and because a lot of it's also about personality. It's about projects that they've worked on, and you need to find that out rather than sort of just being like, I need a producer, any producer. Because I think you want to make sure that you are starting a relationship that you want to stay in for the length at least of one film, if not for a bunch of films.
There's a great, very quickly, there's a great thing, there's a great Canadian broadcaster, his name's Rudy Boutignol. And he always says about choosing filmmakers to work with and commission, he always says, I want to work with people that I'd like to have dinner with. Because you're going to be in what is in essence a marriage for the next couple of years, and you actually want to work with people that you connect with and you get along with. I think you're right. You have to carefully select the people that you want to work with and that you may work with for a long time and have a relationship that's productive.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Way in the back, and then over here, and then there.
Hi, yeah. I had a question about, what do you say to a filmmaker when you really believe in their project and you take it on, but then you find that the broadcasters might find that it's too political of a topic, or there's a change in, I was working in France, for example, at one point there was a change in the hierarchy of who was saying yes or no to projects, and this, you know, you can't get it made, because even though you believe in it 100%, or, you know, maybe someone said yes and then they're no longer there. How do you keep encouraging a filmmaker who has, you know, that kind of situation, maybe for years? Yeah,
look, I think you as a producer, you take that responsibility very seriously in terms of on pitching a project, and you put a lot of thought into which broadcaster you'll pitch to and at what point. And you're right, there is a high turnover of, you know, having just got a good relationship with various people, they do disappear. I think you've just got to keep honest and communicate carefully with the director, and, you know, and not over-promise. I mean, this is a really tough competitive business. None of you need to be told that, I'm sure. You know.
I think while you want a producer who won't give up, you know, you want a producer who won't, at the first sign of a no, you know, runs away. So I sadly was a part of a project that was in development for 4 years. I was attached to it. It was an interactive and film project, and we almost got it set up, and in the end we had to say it didn't work, and the project collapsed. So you want somebody who'll fight, though, and we fought for 4 years to try to get it made, and we almost did, but it just didn't work. So somebody who believes in you and doesn't run away and wants to make what you want to make is important.
Over here.
Hi. I think Mark's answered my question with this comment about marriage, but I'll ask it anyway, which is this idea of having the partnership between a director and a producer and having that support. And there are as many producers as there are filmmakers. I mean, there's probably hundreds and hundreds of both here this week. And it's like, you know, what was it called, speed dating? How do you find that right person? Any advice for the directors who are looking, other than the 5 of you that are here? How in that thousands of list of producers do you track down the person that matches your way of looking at the world? There was an article in The Guardian last week with an interview with Maron Karmitz from France and K2, which is a fictional feature producer, but has the same kind of attitude. So.
I think it's quite simple in a way. I think you need to look at the work, the body of work of that producer, and you know, if that excites you and you think it has the values of the programs that you're making, that you want to make, I think that's absolutely key. I mean, I'll put my director's hat on it. Some years ago, I had a project which is very dear to my heart called. It was called From Korea with Love, and it was about a couple who couldn't have children and were going through the international adoption process. And she would only have her story told by me. She knew me. It was a personal thing. So, but I wasn't a producer then, so I shopped around for a producer. And I interviewed quite a few people, and I ended up with the one who had told some very difficult, raw stories and had done them unflinchingly, but also with great humanity. And I also, I talked to her about things like, this is my idea, this is my baby, how will we work together? And she was, very generous and very honest with me, and it was a terrific relationship, very straightforward. But that would be my advice, yeah.
And also that we don't exist in a vacuum. I mean, I don't think of this as sort of going on LinkedIn and going, it's like this, this community of peers. Even if you're just starting out. I mean, I know I say this all the time, but I really do think it's true. As competitive and difficult as the documentary world is, it's also incredibly supportive. And people really do help each other out. And I think so much of this is about the community that you're in. So ask filmmakers if who they've worked with, who they really loved. Look at the work, obviously. But so much of it is really about meeting people and seeing who you connect with, and if you trust their work. Rather than I don't think it's a question of just it's not research in your office all the time.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just throw out something from the other side. Is have a contract and have it delineate what the responsibilities are, and most importantly, have some sort of termination agreement in there, and who owns the project if you decide to not work together.
Especially if you're working with people you love, actually. Mm-hmm.
Especially. Most importantly,
if that's when it gets
that's
really
right.
tricky. That
is exactly right. Really good friends, love partners. I've seen too many really nasty divorces. And it is kind of like the same thing like doing a prenup. You don't want to talk about what's going to happen at the end in the beginning of the relationship, but you can actually do it objectively in the beginning before you're that deeply invested into it.
Agreed.
Wait, back there? Oh, I'm sorry. I said to this lady over here.
Yours.
But let's yeah. I felt bad for the people carrying the mics. You're wonderful volunteers. I'm just a flaky moderator.
So I'm just producing my first feature film and working with first-time director as well. Mm-hmm. And we're so in the middle of the project at the moment and we're sort of also trying to think about the future. How many kind of future ideas should we be putting out there? Because we're thinking the next, because it's so intense that you have to kind of really love that idea and you don't want to get wed to the next one too quickly. How many different ideas do you have kind of going on at the same time? How many do you develop before you get a director on board? That kind of question is like, how far do you go with each idea before you choose this is the one that I'm going to give all my time to for the next 2
Great
years?
question. Does anybody want to?
Yeah, sure. There. That's the slate for my company. It includes 10 one-offs in various states with various filmmakers, but all developed, all fully developed, 12 series and 2 dramas.
Yeah, but wait a minute. Hold on a second. Again, I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
No, but
you
a
are
lot.
really, really, really super experienced producer.
But
with
that's
that.
not what we're not talking about. That what I'm trying to. The point I'm trying to make is you have to have a bunch of things that you're thinking about, researching, looking at stories, starting to talk with your director, and maybe do a 1 page on something that you saw that you really love, and begin that process while you're making the other film. This is one of the classic mistakes in all filmmaking, which is you get so caught up in a big project or two, and then you don't have the space mentally to develop 1 or 2 more ideas. It doesn't have to be that many, but what I'm saying is you need to stay alive in terms of developing new projects, and I've seen it happen 50 times, crash, and it's over.
Do you have a staff who work with you?
Small, there's 4 of us. That's it. But lots of these are, with filmmakers who are helping. They're co-producers. A couple of them are with European co-producers. So there's more than us taking responsibility for these projects. They're often with lots of partners. But you have to stay curious, and you have to stay writing and trying to shape new ideas. I think that is necessary. And if you're curious about the world and love the world, it's not that difficult to do.
Can I just make 2 points
yes,
quickly?
and then over there.
Okay.
Sure, we've got a half hour.
Just on that note, and you were saying which ones to go with next and how do you choose, I think that will just come from your gut. Like, you will instinctively know which one to go when it's right. And you are absolutely right. You have to make sure that you're developing other stuff, because one of the mistakes that I made way at the beginning, I was working in production when I made my first short film. And so it was something that we were shooting on the weekend and pulling favors, and it was all of that stuff. The short film did really well. It played in a bunch of really cool festivals. It won some awards, and then people say, "Hey, what have you got next?" Yes. I was like, "Oh, I don't know." You don't want that. That's embarrassing.
Yeah. That's actually true for both directors and producers. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who haven't made a film, please hear the very sweet words that Kat just said. I made a short film that played in lots of festivals. It's probably the very best way to launch a career. And yes, have that other one in your back pocket when you go. Over there? Yes. Sorry, I have to run around. And then you're going to have to go way in the back.
I'm glad you started talking about co-productions. I'm from the States, and that's actually why I'm here, is looking for international co-productions, because I feel like that's one of the most viable ways for U.S. filmmakers to kind of get a project finished. If any of you could speak just a little bit about some of the pros and cons that you've seen in working in those, that would be awesome to hear.
I think, Mark, that's your bailiwick.
That's my turf. Well, for one, there are no treaties with the United States, with other countries, and we, between all the other countries, let's say, that co-produce, we have treaties between us, so France and Canada, and Denmark, etc. When we work with American filmmakers, let's say it would be more like a co-venture. Mm-hmm. So it's a business partnership, but that partnership doesn't enjoy the benefits of treaties, which allows, in a way, for it to become one film that is both, let's say, French and Canadian at the same time. So to get governmental support in both markets, you have to meet certain criteria, and treaties allow this to happen in a super effective way. So with Americans, it's more of a co-venture environment, and they're very challenging. They're very complicated. I did a film, we produced a film called The Al-Qaeda Code, about recruiting young people, and it was a France-Canada co-production. It was very hard to make. It was very complicated. There were 2 directors, a Canadian and a French director, and in the end it was fine, but it was enormously difficult. So, don't do a co-production unless you really need it in terms of making sure that the film is financed in the proper way, and you have to find, just like finding a producer as a director, you finding a co-producer that you can trust and work together is also a very difficult dance, and it's been successful sometimes for us and not so successful on other occasions.
It's a great point. I think it was, I said all the way in the back. Yes, the lady with her hand up.
Hi, is it working? Yeah. Hi, I'm a producer, and I'm right at the beginning. I'm learning, and I've already got some experience working for other producers. And what I find really tricky is when there is a need for an international co-production, or for funding in general, and one has to come, or has a possibility to come into a sort of compromise. So, for example, this urge for money, I've seen producers accepting to enter international co-productions with people that I don't think there was anything in common really, and there was also personality clash, and some of them, for example, especially if they came from fiction feature films, they had a completely different way of working, and plus there is a cultural clash as well. And that's one problem, you know, that, you know, it's a kind of situation where there are many more problems than solutions. And then another thing is, you know, the compromise, knowing, for example, someone in an examining board to get a fund, and in more dodgy places where, you know, this urge for money can tempt a producer to accepting something that is on the borderline between legal and illegal as well. So in such situations, how do you, is there an advice that you can give? Should one stick to the high road, how you call it? Or do you actually come to a compromise in situations like that? Is it clear? Yeah. Is the question clear? Thank you.
That's a whole other panel, isn't it? Co-production.
It's a whole other panel. Yeah, that'll be the next panel. It's, I mean, I think I would just repeat the advice. It just, you know, only do a co-production if you have to, and it makes good sense on every level, that the partner seems appropriate, that culturally you're going to get along, that you share the same vision of the film. I mean, it's a very difficult dance, and I'd say don't do it unless you have to. And maybe you make the film for less money, that $200,000 less than you might have had, because it is a challenging road. So I think only when completely necessary.
And also, I mean, I think just on the, raising financing, I mean, you bring up, it's not just co-productions, right? You need to read the fine print with any money that you take and make sure that you're not giving away the moose. That was what I was told when I first started working in television, is, you know, like, don't give away the moose. I mean, you have to be very careful about your goals for the project, and if you are accepting money, which means that you've like signed away all territories, I mean, you can do that, but you need to know what you're doing as a producer. So that you make sure that the film has the best life it can have, and that you're not taking, you know, $20,000, which means that you're then going to be tied to something that you don't want to be tied to down the line. And I don't think that's just co-productions. Co-productions are tricky because there's more cooks in the kitchen, and so, you know, the more people you have, the more you have to manage these relationships, and there's more politics, but I mean, any money you take is going to have strings, and making sure that you're very comfortable with what those strings involve.
Is that moose like chocolate mousse, or moose like an animal?
It's like a Canadian.
It's a Canadian.
I was going to say,
just
it
wondering.
must have been a Canadian that told you that.
Do you say that in Canada? Don't give away the moose.
No, I've never heard that.
Certainly don't say it in Australia.
You don't say it in the U.S.
We don't say it.
Kangaroo.
Does anyone say that? No.
Can someone tweet that right now?
Mind you, Deborah, I wouldn't be giving away my chocolate mousse either.
Hashtag bewildering Canadian adages. Yeah.
South African transplanted to New York are imitating Canadian attitudes.
No, it was Jess Surge from BritDog. Jess Surge from BritDog told me not to give that. When I left Channel 4, she said, don't give away the moose.
Okay, well.
Okay.
More questions? Yes, over there and then over there.
I just wanted to follow up. Earlier you were talking about nurturing talent and working with directors, and I've got a film here, actually, me and Sinead are producing together. That's our first feature, and maybe some advice as producers just starting out who we had a really great exec, but I mean, would that be the best way to sort of someone to guide you when you are, because you are obviously having to bring all these people together and manage the whole project, having the best way to get a bit of guidance while you're doing that when you're first starting out as a producer?
Are you making the film for anybody? Has anybody financed the film to date? Because that's my first question.
It's all crowdsourced and
great.
donations.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thanks. So on again at 8:30 on Wednesday. Still getting within.
I don't think you need any advice there.
Yeah, no, you're way ahead of the game.
No, that's a really good question. You know, there are more and more filmmakers. Well, I would say it's gone backwards. You know, in the U.S. at least, there were tons of filmmakers that were working really independently, and then in the last 10 to 15 years have become more and more funders that are getting involved, actually taking on executive producer credits, which is another thing to really look at in terms of giving away the moose, is giving away credit, which seems like it's free, but in fact it really isn't, because it is taking something from the pot. But it's a great question of where do you go to get advice? Yeah. Other producers?
I mean, I've been lucky in that I've done training schemes where I've received mentoring, so they exist. So I would look out for those first and foremost, but also you can just approach people, and especially established producers, they really want to give back. They do. Ask. Find someone, ask. It's really simple. Like, the worst thing they're going to do is say no.
Yeah.
I had the Christmas documentary I mentioned. At that point, I was trying to add something with value to that project because it was quite gentle. And the way that I thought to do that was to put a voiceover on it. And like I said, it was my first one, never done a doc before. And I approached Stephen Fry, and he said yes. And he could have said no, but he didn't. He said yes. And that made a difference, that film. Worst to do is say no.
It's actually one of the first questions I ask if we are giving project funding through at Tribeca is, do you feel like the project has a safe pair of hands? I mean, not that I don't trust you, but I mean, is there someone that you can go to if you feel like you need advice, you know, or you run into, like, you know, hot water politically, ethically, whatever it may be? Like, is there someone that you can go to? And if there isn't, we'll often try and find, if not an executive producer, at least a mentor, someone very, very experienced in the industry who they can at least go to and say, you know, help, this has happened. And the level that they get involved with really depends on the project. And obviously some projects are much more, you know, we've done projects where, I mean, there are actually sort of dangerous things, so we have to be very, very careful. And in that case, we'll actually make sure that they do, you know, hostile environment training, whatever it is. We're not, you know, it can be a lot or it can be a little, but just a safe pair of hands.
Yeah, I think that's right. Even as a reasonably experienced producer, I have taken on an exec producer on occasions when it's a kind of quite complicated series. And in some ways, I just want a really smart sounding board, you know, because I'm the only person that runs the company. So sometimes it's just, you know, it's a great thing, even as an experienced producer. So yes, I think a really clever exec producer who really knows the kind of lay of the land can just be invaluable.
Something that we recommend to our filmmakers, particularly young emerging filmmakers, is to get a consulting producer. It's a really interesting relationship. It doesn't necessarily give the power of an executive producer, but it brings in somebody who maybe has a name, who's going to lend their advice as well as their name to help you to get your project off the ground. And you can use them as much as you want. You can have a relationship that's based on a fee for services, or they just might want their name attached to the project because they believe in the film. There was somebody else that had their hand up. Okay, in the back there.
Hi. More a question with, I've come into doing films or producing films more by accident, and we're a group of 3 that produced a film together, which was then very successful. We then went on to create a company and now producing more and more. But because we're 3, our roles very often cross over. We do all of us do everything. I have the title of producer, but it's not because I have the experience of being a producer or in film necessarily. And I find my biggest challenge is when it comes to cooperations or being commissioned to do work, the contracts. I have no idea how to write the contracts. So is that something that you're writing, or do you get your lawyers in to help write the contracts? How do you get a good contract written? I have no idea.
Yeah, lawyers.
Fun.
Lawyers.
Lawyers.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what often happens for us is because they will be similar in nature, a lot of the contracts, you know, we'll use a template that we've had, and we'll try to do the first draft of it and put in the negotiated terms as best possible, and then have a lawyer look through it. In terms of broadcasters, they're just firing giant contracts back at you that are, CBC contracts are like 125 pages long or something. So you just have to know the model of their contracts and look to certain sections and monitor it. But in general, have templates and use them. And then to reduce costs, just have your lawyer look at the draft that you've done. That'll save you money. You don't want them drafting every time you have a contract.
But, you know, I'll also say that it's really important to find a lawyer that has actually worked with that contract before.
Yeah.
For those of you who are American or have ever tried to deal with American broadcasting, ITVS has extraordinarily cumbersome contracts. And I've seen filmmakers spend just boatloads of money hiring somebody that was cheaper by the hour, but who had never worked with this contract before.
You're right.
On the other side,
entertainment lawyers.
Yeah.
Find an entertainment lawyer.
But also find, and go one step deeper. Now I'll put on my distributor hat. Find a lawyer that is familiar with that part of the industry. Fiction distribution contracts are really different than broadcast contracts, are really different than educational distribution contracts.
Yeah.
It is really important, and absolutely you have to have a lawyer look at all of these documents, and it is expensive.
We've often found that there are producer-friendly lawyers we do a buyout for a project for these lawyers. Now, they're obviously wonderful people and not charging massive amounts by the hour, and that makes it really affordable. So I don't know where you live or whether that's feasible, but you know, you can hunt out some entertainment lawyers that won't charge just by the hour, they charge for the project.
And I mean, some of the best ones I think are also, they're kind of almost like creative producers, they're creative lawyers. Not only are they good at actually doing the contracts for you, they are actually really good to have on side, because they are having a good lawyer is invaluable.
Yes.
Changing the subject a little bit in regards to distribution, because that's a whole new world. And as a producer, I found out I have to know about this world, because otherwise I don't know anything what's going on once the film is finished. And I found out that all the expectations I had, if I don't really get my head around it, that's not what I'm going to get. So, I would like to ask you, a distributor, in this stage, would you advise or advise new filmmakers to use crowdfunding and different ways of distributing, or would you just advise us to just go with an international distributor, don't expect to see the money, but kind of get the film out there? Or would you advise us, because I've guessed a lot of
tweet that?
Well, that's what I just found out, that could happen, because I realized that the MG somehow had to be paid back or something like that I didn't really know. I just thought that was money that I got. But anyway, I just find there are so many new alternative ways to distribute where we can actually get the money back, because we have a lot of private equity in the film. So is it something you would say, don't go there later, or yes, try perhaps, because of course the financial issue as a first filmmaker will probably also to decide if you can continue to work.
Do you
want me to?
You kick in first.
Sure. Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say what I think everybody here has been saying in one way or another, is that it's really important to have a network of people that you can go to and talk to, either as advisors, as colleagues. And nobody likes to bitch more about distributors than other filmmakers. Directors, producers, I don't care, but nobody does. And that is where you'll get some of your best information. And I say that as a distributor. And I tell filmmakers that want to distribute with us, talk to the filmmakers that we work with. In the same way that we're talking about how do you choose a producer, how do you choose a co-producer, an international, whatever. That's number one. Number two, you do want to be really careful about giving away the moose. We're back to giving away the moose. You know, it's like you do I don't see why a crowdfunding campaign would give away the moose, but certainly somebody came up to me today and said, you know, we've been emailing with your director of acquisitions and da-da-da-da. And yes, of course, we know that it's been available online for free for the last year. And it's like, well, sorry, we sell DVDs for $295 to universities. Why would anybody buy a DVD or a stream when they can get it for free? That's throwing away the moose. But other than that, I certainly would never expect you to go with to do a deal with an international sales agent thinking that you're never going to get any money. Why do that? So again, you know, it is your job as a producer to learn as much as you can about what's going on in distribution. And I know that it is really, really complicated. But I would really encourage people to, you know, read docs, read Filmmaker Magazine, read IndieWire, read as much as you can about really what's happening in terms of distribution, and be really careful about what rights you're giving away.
And also what your goals are. I mean, I think this is something that often kind of gets left out of the conversation, you know, when it's like, you know, should I do this, should I do that? Because there's no, you know, you can do whatever you want. I mean, you can finish the film and put it online for free. No one's going to stop you, right? But that means certain other things are not going to happen. And it may be that you don't care, but it may be that you do. And I think a lot of it is also, what are your goals for the film? Yeah. And how is the film structured? Do you know, what markets do you want to go into? I mean, being really, really strategic as a team about where you want the film to go and then making the right decisions for that. And I think often people kind of panic. It's a little bit like the raising financing, right? They just want a deal, the first deal that comes, or they want a sales agent, so they'll, you know, sign up with a sales agent who's not very good, who charges a upfront fee, which I always think is a terrible idea.
Service deals too.
Yeah, and you just have to be careful, I think, and work with people you trust, but know what you want for the film. You know, what you want the film to do, who you want it to reach. I think that's very important as well, because there are different things you can do now. You know, you don't have to go with broadcasters, but if you don't do that, there are going to be other challenges.
And I'd say a word of support for distributors depends on how much time you want to spend in that sphere as a producer, because it is really full on. I say that having never done it, because I've always gone with a distributor, but I did start selling a format of mine, thinking I didn't even know if it would be very popular or not, so I just sort of wandered out on my own and hoped for the best. And then there was a lot of interest, and then I made a decision to go with a distributor. And about 6 months later, when they'd sold the 11th option for it, which was pretty impressive, they then, when we went into production with a country, there was so much negotiation around that format with the territory, which was France. It went on and on and on and on for such a long time. And the distributor dealt with that. Yeah. And I thought I would not have had the patience nor the time to do that. So I think it's also about a decision of, if there's one particular project and you want to see it all the way through, then I would advise to go to investigate and do it maybe. But I also think if you want to be creating, like the other producer said, thinking of your new ideas and moving on to the other one, then it's going to be really hard if you're also the sole distributor.
Back there, we have time for one more question, and then I'm going to ask for just final words from the panelists, just your kind of best tip for those who want to be producers.
Hi, I was just wondering, like, regarding the skills you should get, rather than just like industry-specific knowledge, is it worth getting like business qualifications? Could
Great
that
question.
be useful?
Business school, anyone?
I am going to say yes. So I set up my production company because I wanted to access some funding. I didn't have a clue about running a company. I didn't know what I was doing. The most basic stuff, not a clue. But training now is geared more and more towards the business side. And I think I was like 2 years in before I actually understood what I needed to do. The companies that I have come up with that are still running, and actually not just running, but running really successfully with an exit where they will sell, they all have business backgrounds.
Okay, one for the business. Any thought?
Yeah, I think it is worth trying to have some business background. And I actually don't know enough about some of the film programs out there, and there's a Ryerson University in Toronto, and I have to say I don't know if they actually have some business courses associated with their film and television school, but I suspect they do, and I would say, yeah, you should take them.
I think also just, you know, you do have to learn a lot on the job, though, and I do think a lot of it is also about an entrepreneurial mindset and understanding that you are going to have to think like a business person a lot of the time as you go. You don't need an MBA, but you really, if you can't do it, you need to hire someone who can. I think that's the trick. Or work with someone, bring someone on board to work with you who's really wants to do the, because a lot of it, I think, I mean, this is something I think that has come up a lot. It's a lot of different skill sets that you're being required to do as a producer, and you have to also think about what your strengths are and maybe bring people to work with you who have those strengths if you don't have them, because like personally contracts drive me crazy, so I would rather spend the money to have someone work with me helping me, because I will miss stuff in the contracts. I don't read the fine print. I know that about myself. I get excited about ideas. I like to have a slate, so I make sure I work with people who do have that attention to detail. Otherwise, you know, I would be absolutely screwed and I would give away the moose.
I think,
and there are, by the way,
sorry,
I just want to say there are lots in every country. I think that there are more and more schemes. I love using that word because in the U.S. it's such a negative word, and here it's perfectly fine. More and more schemes to actually help producers to get the skills. Some of the programs that Kat went to. We're starting a Producers Academy in New York for women filmmakers. There's the Future Producers School here. So I think that there are really resources that you can find.
I think that, you know, there are specialist accountants in entertainment, right? And accountants and bookkeepers who work, you know, primarily for production companies and entertainment companies. And they are probably in every marketplace. Those people are there. And if you ask other producers, they'll say, oh, yeah, I've got this accountant. They just work in entertainment. Those people are also going to be invaluable to you as a producer.
Okay, last words. What's the one most important skill that you use as a producer?
Advice?
What's the one piece of advice
one
you
word?
could give?
Run.
No, come on, positive.
I never give up. You know, I go back to, you know, I was saying that I worked with Anita Roddick. I was lucky to work with her for 4 years. And she always just said, don't care what anybody else says. If you believe in something, you'll make it happen.
Beautiful. Don't give up. Jennifer?
I think somebody else very wise over the last couple of days said this, which was be kind to your idea, which I thought was a really lovely, lovely thought. And it's a similar idea, really. It is, you know, we can all question our idea, but if in your gut you think it's a really good one, then don't sort of doubt yourself too early on. I think I would say that. The other quick one was, I think as a producer you should just always try and hang on to your sense of humour, because God, you'll need it.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think don't give up. Be kind to your idea. Be kind to your team. Protect your team. I really agree. You know that you have to have such passion for the project, but don't forget that you are also dealing with human beings. Don't give away the moose. And I think the other thing that's really, really important is to really look up and look at what's happening in the world beyond just beyond just the documentary world. Look at what audiences are doing. Look at new technologies, because the way people are consuming media is changing, and you want to make sure that you're getting your content. Sorry, I swore I would never use that word. You want to make sure that you're getting your films, your projects in front of people. So you need to be thinking about how people are accessing films and accessing projects, and I think that's going to become increasingly important over the next few years.
Kat, you have the last word.
The key word for me actually is gut.
Is what?
Gut. Go
gut.
with your gut. Always,
go to your gut.
Yeah, always. That's it. My last word.
Well, I hope all of you go to your gut. Don't give away the moose. Be kind to your ideas, and don't give up. And good luck with your projects. Be kind to your ideas. That's really nice. It's beautiful. It's really, really nice.